Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Justice Conversation, right here on Usala Radio, with your host, Brian O'Neill and Luis Gonzalez.
Welcome everybody to another edition of A Justice Conversation with your host, Suave Gonzalez and Dr. Brian O'Neill. He cannot be in the studio today, but he sent his love to everybody. And today we have a very important show. Today we'll be talking about wrongful convictions. You know, for a lot of people, I know this is personal if you have a loved one in prison and they're claiming innocence. You know, the United States lead the world in incarceration. You know, currently we have 2.3 million people incarcerated in the United States of America. That means that wrongful convictions rates at 1% translate to 20,000 people punished for crimes they didn't commit in the United States. You know, so today in the studio, we have our guest, Jeff Stein. He's an investigator that investigates these kind of issues, and he's going to give us the detail on how we could get involved in these issues as a community and society. You know, so I want to dedicate today's show to all the innocent men and women still in the prisons fighting their conviction, especially to Eddie Ramirez, Johnny Brooklyn, and Willie Beasley. And to those that made it out, good love, man. We need y'all to stand up for those that still behind. So, Jeff, welcome to our studio.
Thank you very much for having me. Glad to be here.
You know, and we're going to get right into it because this is a topic that we can't play with. You know, in the last 9 months, the city of Philadelphia has exonerated 9 people. And we've seen more and more cases coming up for review. In your professional opinion, why do you think that our current district attorney is taking an interest in them type of cases, and how can that benefit the relationship between the people that don't trust the criminal justice system and the criminal justice system? How can we just build a relationship and trust in them more?
Well, I think with our new district attorney, he's got the background in criminal defense work and civil rights work. So he has that background and that history, and he's been fighting the fight, and then he joined other sides, if you will, to the DA's office. But he brings his past with him to help right the wrong and see that there are wrongful convictions. So it's great to have him there. I know there's been a lot of controversy with him and people who don't support him and the police union and whatnot, but these are things that we need to continue to educate the public. And you mentioned it, if I will, you mentioned that there's 2.3 million people currently incarcerated. The United States has more people incarcerated than any other domestic country in the world, which is some really horrific numbers. And there's no science to figure out how many people are wrongfully convicted, but the numbers by all of the experts out there and the exoneration groups and the Innocence Project, everyone, the numbers are somewhere between 2% and 10%. So that means that there's anywhere from 40,000 to 200,000 people who are currently incarcerated that are wrongfully convicted. And if I can add, that does not include all of the people who were charged with a crime and are doing time while they're waiting for their trial. So people don't realize that a lot of these people who are not convicted, they're in their trial stage, they can be in prison from anywhere from 6 months to 5 years fighting their trial. And they, at that point in time, may be nolladed, may be found innocent. They're fighting their fight, but they're behind bars fighting that fight.
So for someone in the state of Pennsylvania, because we got a lot of fans in the state of Pennsylvania that are watching our show, and a lot of them have loved ones in prison, and some of them are still fighting, their convictions. What do it take for someone to convince someone like you that fights these issues to take on their case?
So there are fight the fight, continue to fight the fight, never give up. To get somebody who's already been convicted, really most of the ways, the most common way for them to fight that fight is to prove in their PCRA, their Post-Conviction Relief Act, they need to prove that there was ineffective counsel at the time of their trial or that there was new evidence that wasn't available at the time of the trial. So those are two of the more important factors when they are trying to prove their innocence. And they can demonstrate that by telling an investigator such as myself or a new attorney, or a lot of times they try to fight this fight pro se, and pros and cons to that. And, if we have time, we can even talk about, what are the advantages and disadvantages. I think there's many disadvantages to being pro se, but unfortunately,
I would like you to take a little bit of time and explain that, because a lot of the time we dealing with prisoners that don't have money to hire private investigators or lawyers that will fight this fight for them. So we are forced to go pro se in the courts, and a lot of people don't know that pro se, most of the time they don't listen to them petition, they rubber stamp them, even if you have all the evidence available.
Right.
So, speak on it a little bit, please.
Pro se becomes a challenge. Pro se means you're representing yourself in the courts. And I will say that a lot of incarcerated inmates become almost like jailhouse lawyers is how they're referenced, right? Because they spend a lot of time in the law library learning, and you're in for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. That's longer than law school is. So they're really doing their own self-study and researching the laws, and they do a really good job. So, they can be pro se. However, just in the eyes of the beholder, meaning the jury, the judge, the district attorneys, they're pro se, they're fighting that fight. And it becomes a challenge because they don't have the funds. They're in jail. Their family doesn't have the money to hire, a high-profile attorney who can represent them, and that is a challenge. However, one thing I will say, everybody has a right to an attorney. Under our Sixth Amendment, we have a right to an attorney. That also means they have a right to an investigator. So even if they are pro se and they're representing themselves, they can petition the courts for funds for a private investigator. And that's something that can be arranged through each and individual court and judge, where they can get the means to do that. But it's an uphill battle. It is a challenge. I look at it like a football game. If you're starting out that game and it's 0-0, as soon as they're pro se, they're down 7-0. They are. They're incarcerated. Now they're down 14-0. They're a minority. It's 21-0 before they even get into the courtroom. And so it's an uphill battle, and any PCRAs are uphill battles to begin with.
So for someone that's sitting in SCI Phoenix State Prison, that most of the society know he's innocent, how can we convince not only the court system, but people like yourself? They say, you know what, you don't have the funds to pay me, but I'm going to still take your case. What do it take for you as a private investigator? And I don't want you to speak for all private investigators, but for a private investigator to say, you know what, this is a case that I could work with. What do it take? Because we understand that you're in the business. This is a business.
Right.
It takes hours, it takes money, takes resources to fight a conviction. And we know that could get real expensive. But what do it take for someone to say, you know what, this is a person that don't belong in jail, and they need the help, and we just gonna give it to them? What do it take? Because we see it sometimes, but not all the time.
Like you said, this is a business, and myself and all the other private investigators still need to pay the bills, so they need money and income coming in. But I do like to have on my docket, on my file, in my open cases, I like to have something that I'm doing pro se for somebody, and it really takes them showing me, writing to me, calling me, telling me, listen, here's what I have. I make a few phone calls. I do a little research and find, what they're saying has some merit to it. We're going to dig deeper. These things can take hours and hours, especially when you're trying to track down witnesses. And, a lot of times they have an address that's 10 years old, 15 years old. Now trying to track somebody down, you can spend a lot of time and money just trying to find that one person. Then they don't want to talk to you, or maybe they do. I have a current case now that my client's on death row. I've been working on this for about 5 or 6 years. We finally got a PCRA hearing scheduled for next month. So I can't talk as much about it as I would like to, but I know from all of the people that I talked to, he didn't do it. I know who did. I identified who did. So those are the type of cases that, in fact, I was just out serving some papers this morning before he came on the show for that case. So really trying to find that right person, and the Innocence Project will do the same thing, and they want to take on that case and try to right the wrong for people. There's a lot of groups out there that want to help. People just need to keep being persistent. Listen, Jeff, this is what I have. I didn't do it. I was here. I was there. Talk to my neighbor, my aunt, whoever. There's people out there that just didn't know to come forward, or again, ineffective counsel. They were never called. I mean, we see this so many times, time and time again, that there is a list of defendants or of witnesses, of alibi witnesses, and they don't get called. Why not? The attorney didn't think we needed them. And, I tell people, guilty or not, you think you're innocent, in your heart that you're innocent. The way our system is, and for your show and my show and everybody who's involved in the criminal justice reform system and wrongful convictions, is you're trying to educate the public, right? People who are going to be potential jurors, because they get blinded by just because the courts and the police say that this person did something. Well, they conducted an investigation. It may have been good, it may not have been good, and a lot of times we find that it was subpar, just because of some bad apples. And I do want to just use this caveat. I am pro law enforcement, pro police, and thankful for them protecting us. But it just takes those one or two bad apples. And when you have big police departments like Philadelphia, well, that one or two bad apples is really 20 or 30 bad apples as opposed to a small little police department. So that just multiplies the problem. But be persistent, tell us what's going on, and let us try to help you.
And I just want to add something to what you just said. You said you're fighting the case of a client that's on death row. For those people that don't know, a recent study estimated that 4.1% of inmates awaiting execution now in the United States are innocent, and that at least 340 innocent people has been executed since 1973. This is how important, my people, this issue is. A lot of time we sit down and think, oh, justice will prevail. No, we have had people in the United States of America since 1973. It's a known fact that at least 340 people has been executed. And I'm willing to bet that the majority of them people executed was probably minorities and brown people, or people that couldn't afford the resources to fight their convictions.
I agree.
And in Philadelphia, and the reason we wanted you on the show is because when we speak on the show, most of the time we like to show people like this is real. These are people behind the scene that you never hear about. They are fighting, to reform the system, because that's exactly what you're doing. Whether you're a private investigator or you hired by the court, you fighting to reform the system. You fighting to correct a wrong that could perhaps save a whole generation and family. So right now we're going on a commercial break. You listening to Jeff Stein on Usala Radio, a justice conversation. We'll be right back. We got to go on a commercial break, but stay tuned in, because when we come back, he's going to tell us a little bit about his background, his show, and what motivated him to get involved in this work.
What do you think you're doing, Kevin?
Was just gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
Like hearing voices?
Like your text-to-emoji ratio?
Oh man, the selfies. Selfie, nailed it.
We all have warning signs that let us know that we're probably not okay to drive. Mine is pretending to be your subconscious.
Craig, come on man, let's put a ride home.
If you love them enough to suck the snot out of their nose at 4 a.m., then surely you'll check NHTSA.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.
Welcome back to a Justice Conversation with your host, Suave Gonzalez and Dr. Brian O'Neill. Again, we're in the studio live with a private investigator that investigate wrongful convictions. Jeff, before we go on, I want you, the people that are listening to us, like, get them a picture of who you are, what motivated you to get involved with these type of issues and cases, and how important it is for them to not give up.
So I was like most of America and believed that the motto, guilty until proven innocent, I was that person. I've worked my whole entire life since I was 18 years old working on various cases. I started out when I was 18 as a store detective catching shoplifters and employee theft, employee stealing. And so I was familiar with packaging full cases for prosecution, for criminal prosecution, and did that for a good portion of my career, and became a director of loss prevention and security for a lot of Fortune 500 companies. And again, we spent a lot of time prosecuting people from small thefts to multi-million-dollar theft rings and conspiracies, and the list goes on, working with federal agencies, drug kingpins, these groups that would go in and steal. So I spent a lot of time prosecuting people and arresting people and locking them up. And then I started doing private investigations, and I started branching out with different types of investigations. And when I got my first criminal defense case, I was intrigued because I didn't, prior to about 12 years ago, really didn't do any criminal defense work. And got my first criminal defense case, and my client, I truly believed, was innocent. And it really opened my eyes when I started going through and looking at the paperwork and seeing how poorly some of the investigations were conducted. And there was definitely lackadaisical police work. I've seen prosecutorial misconduct, false and coerced statements. The list goes on, and it really opened my eyes. And from that moment on, my passion and dedication was to doing criminal defense work and working to represent those anywhere from 40,000 to 200,000 people are wrongfully convicted, and to try to keep people from being executed on death row who didn't commit the crime. Like I said, my one case, I know he didn't do it. I know who did. I have fact witnesses that put him somewhere. So I really feel pretty confident that he didn't do it, and we hope to get him off in the near future. When you see these cases, I worked on the. You mentioned that recently there was 9 exonerees in Pennsylvania. I believe it was. I'm trying to think of the year 2012. I think it was 2012, maybe even as far back as 2010. I worked on the case and provided investigative support for the 10th person who was exonerated in the state of Pennsylvania. So think about that. Let's say it was, I forget the exact year, but let's say it was 2012. That means there was only 10 people up to 2012 that were exonerated in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, just in the past few months, there was 9. And there's a lot more, especially with what was uncovered in Philadelphia and some of the corrupt police officers like Jeffrey Walker, who is now cooperating and trying to help right the wrong, and even worked on the Meek Mills case. So that's a little bit of how I got started and why, and now I'm so passionate about it. I have a podcast dedicated to that, and if we have time later, we can talk about that.
We're definitely going to talk about that. But I have a question. As a private investigator, before you came over to criminal cases, have you seen or witnessed, or do you know of prosecutors in generally that they know that this person may be innocent, but to obtain a conviction, we still moving forward? Do that really happens? Do it take place? Because for us in our neighborhoods, we had this conspiracy that it happens all the time. Do it really happen?
It does. It really happens, and it's enlightening. And that's one of the problems in our system is that there is prosecutorial immunity. So these prosecutors can do wrong, and they don't get punished because they have immunity for that. Whereas a criminal defense attorney or criminal defense investigator, if we hold back information, we could lose our license, we can get fined, we can get put in jail. However, you hear about Brady violations, and when these prosecutors violate the Brady violations, they have immunity. They don't get in trouble for it. There needs to be accountability, and that's something that needs to change. There's a really good podcast called In the Dark. I don't know if you've heard that.
Yes.
But I highly recommend to all listeners to read this. It's a podcast, but it was more investigative journalism being reported via a podcast, and it's an amazing story. And I don't want to be a spoiler alert, but that is exactly what we're talking about, where there is no accountability for the prosecutor. This person was tried for the same murder 7 times. That's insane. I have taken statements from people who became witnesses who told me that they lied on 6 different murders to get time off for themselves. They didn't know who committed the murder, but they lied. And they told me that the cops knew they were lying and the DA knew they were lying. This stuff happens. And Jeffrey Walker, who was a show on my podcast, and I know he's working on his own, and there's a book deal and a movie deal coming with him. But Jeffrey Walker, for those of you who don't know, he was a Philadelphia police officer for 34 years, and he worked in their narcotics unit for many of those years. And he was later, I think it was in 2013, where he was caught by the feds. He was corrupt and they were stealing, and he became cooperative and served 3 years in federal prison. But he talks about it. He talked about how they all know, the judges know, they're at the same galas and dinners, and they all work together. So it's known, it's out there, and people just don't believe it. And America is so in tune to think with blinders on. And what I mean by that is, there's so many different police shows and TV shows and CISS and, all the different cop shows that are out there, and people follow them, and they're on for years. There was a show a couple years ago called Conviction Integrity.
Yes.
And that lasted only 1 season. I thought it was a great show. Of course, I'm a little jaded with that, but it was working on wrongful convictions. And obviously the citizens, they didn't find that as fascinating as the shows that are putting everybody behind bars. But there was a lot of reality in that show because it's seen every day. I see it.
And it's funny you say that, because I always say that wrongful convictions, most societies popularly believe about crime. Our understanding of crime is socially constructed, and it's been shaped by many factors, right? But when we have wrongful conviction, it shaped the perception of certain crimes in certain people, and for certain people that don't believe it, they want to, certain people commit certain crimes. But what about the miscarriage of justice when we find out decades and decades later that person never did commit the crime? So it's a shame on those that believe that. But one of the questions that I have for you is, I'm grateful that we have Larry Krasner in office because he kept his word. When he ran, he said, I'm going to investigate these wrongful convictions if they really exist. And so far in 9 months, we have 9. But before him, we had Steph Williams. Before Steph Williams, we had America's deadliest DA, Abraham. And a lot of these convictions that's coming up now came through the office of Lee Abraham. I don't know if he was in the business then, but my question is, in your professional opinion, do you believe that the Philadelphia District Attorney from the 80s all the way to when we got Larry Krasner, did you believe they knew of certain wrongful conviction and just allowed it for the conviction?
I do, and let me elaborate on that, because I don't think that every single person in the DA's office was like that. But I will, there's a lot of good apples out there. And
I don't mean to cut you off, but I say this. not every DA was probably dirty, but if you know of a wrongful conviction and you don't speak on it, you're just as dirty as the DA.
Yes.
They're seeking it.
I agree. Now, thank you. I agree. But I do believe, and what happens is it's a points game. It's a promotion. It's a status symbol. It's political. So that person who's working in the DA's office and they're working on white collar crimes or whatever unit, and the glorious units are the homicide unit, right? Or some of the other units. So what do they want to do? They want to go and they want to win all their cases so they can move up through the ranks. And then eventually maybe they want to become DA. Maybe they want to become a judge. Maybe they want to go somewhere as the solicitor, right? And it becomes a political battle. And then you bring in politics into this as well as promotions and raises, right? So, they start doing well and they move up and they become the lead of a unit. They're getting more money. So there's a lot of different motivating factors in there. And I always say, why is it that during an appeal process or a PCA process, and even the trial, why is it adversarial between the defense and the prosecution? You're out there for the same goal, right? If there was a murder that took place, somebody should be held accountable. So I want to be clear. I'm not saying that somebody who committed murder or committed a crime should be let go, right? They should do their time. I think everybody needs to take accountability for their actions. However, you want to get to the truth and to the bottom of it. So when you're working on a case, instead of being adversarial like it's a football game, because it's not, and I like to use that analogy because I coach football, but this isn't a football game. But the prosecution and the defense team look at that and nobody wants to work together. Nobody wants to cooperate because they're fighting against each other. And in the big picture, they shouldn't be fighting against each other because if it is a murder, somebody committed that crime. Let's find out who did. So if that person is wrongfully convicted, that means there's somebody still out on the streets that's committing murders, that's killing people. And that's affecting that person who is wrongfully convicted. They may have kids, they may be married. Now they're losing their marriage. Their kids don't want to talk to them. The kids are ridiculed at school. Or the kids growing up because now they don't have a father or a mother. Now they're growing up in a single-parent household, and they become, it's a vicious cycle, right? So they're following in their parents' footsteps. Now they start committing crimes because they don't have that parental person there to, help them with their homework. You bring them to the football, bring them to cheerleading, bring them to whatever sports they may play and help guide their future. So really, it affects so many more people than just that person who's wrongfully convicted. It affects their family. And then it affects all the other potential victims of the person who really did commit the crime. It's a lot more than just that one person who's affected. So, when we say anywhere from 40,000 to 200,000, those are the wrongfully convicted.
That don't include the families and the community,
right?
And the supporters and the people that's got to kick out the money to take these long prison trips and pay for sometimes investigators that don't do the work right. That don't include that.
Nope, and that's true. And there's investigators out there who shouldn't be doing this type of work, just like there's attorneys out there. And, you see a lot of attorneys, ineffective counsel, because they take the, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 retainer, and they don't go and meet with their client until the day before trial in the prison. Well, they need to spend time. They're taking that much money. They really need to work it. And there's a lot of good attorneys out there, and I work with a lot of good attorneys out there, so they really need to do their homework and make sure that they have the right person. I'm working on a case right now, a rape case. Guy was sentenced to 30 years for rape. His attorney that he had at the time of his trial, she's been disbarred. She had numerous complaints against her. She told him that the day he was convicted, she said to him, I effed up, and you need to file for ineffective counsel. She knew it, right? So there's these things that happen. People know it. And, then it becomes a good old boys club, too, when you have ineffective counsel because, do they want to admit that they screwed up? Normally, no.
They don't.
Nope.
And you hearing it live here on Usala Radio on a Justice Conversation. We got to go on a commercial break, but we be right back. Let's go.
Don't wait. Communicate. Make your emergency plan today.
Welcome back to a Justice Conversation with your host, Suave Gonzalez and Dr. Brian O'Neill. Before we left, I wanted to ask Jeff for questions. What is the leading cause of wrongful convictions?
I don't know if there's any one particular thing, but I think there's a few different things that make up the majority of wrongful convictions, and one of them is ineffectiveness of counsel. They don't do their job. Another thing is lackadaisical police work. They, look, some of these police departments, especially Philadelphia, have such a heavy caseload. Things get overlooked. They want to close cases. They got more homicides. Chicago, and same thing. Chicago's got a ton of wrongful convictions. It's so bad they just put together a complete unit to review hundreds of cases in Chicago. All these major cities. So lackadaisical police work. Prosecutorial misconduct, same thing. They want to close the case. They don't care. It's another notch in their belt. They just got another conviction. They move on. And then deceitful witnesses. And, I see this so much because, these...
So when you say deceitful witnesses, is that witness identification?
No, that's another thing.
Okay.
Witness misidentification. But what I mean by deceitful witnesses is somebody gets arrested. And they're being charged for drugs and possession of a firearm. And they say, hey, look, I know who committed this murder. I know who did this. I know who did that. If I tell you this, will you let me go? Or, they work a deal. So they're working these deals. These guys, most of the time, don't even know who did it. They're just saying. So they're pointing the finger. They take their enemy, somebody they don't like, right? Somebody who's maybe a competitor, competitive drug dealer on another corner, and they're going to say that he did it. So they get time off, and that happens very, very frequently. They rat on somebody just to get them off, and it's amazing. It's really interesting that people there's the word on the street: ride high or die. Right? They don't want to. There's a group that doesn't want to rat on somebody. So even if they were charged with a crime and they know who did it, they still, because they're worried about retaliation, they're worried about their family, their kids, their children, everything else, who are still on the streets, and that guy's on the streets, and they're worrying about that retaliation. So there's a lot of deceitful witnesses out there. I think those are the biggest categories.
When you look at wrongful convictions in the city of Philadelphia, it seems like the same names come up, the same detective's name, the same prosecutor's name, and one of the names that we see coming up often is Roger King. He was known for having the most minority people on death row in Pennsylvania. And a lot of his cases has been overturned. Detective's name is by the name of Martinez. His name keep coming up in different cases. So again, this is not an entire indictment on all detectives and all prosecutors, but if you know that your colleague is wrong and you just look the other way because you trying to move up the ladder in the office, you just as guilty as that colleague. In my book, you just as guilty. And I think that the people out there should get involved more. We have a voice. We have votes. We could change the landscape of the criminal justice system, not only in the city of Philadelphia, but across the country. We could change that landscape if we get more involved. Again, Larry Krasner's work for us, the people. We put him in office, and he's doing the right thing. His office is doing the right thing. But what about all the other offices in different counties? They're not. There's not. So I'm telling the people out there, get involved. Let your voice be heard. If you believe that your loved one is wrongly in prison, raise hell. Don't stop. because eventually somebody will hear you. It's unfortunate that a lot of times these brothers and sisters have to spend decades in prison before somebody comes and rescue them. But that don't matter. If you are wrongly convicted or if you got a loved one out there, stay on top of your game. Raise hell. Today we have more outlets than we had 20, 30 years ago. We have Facebook, Twitter, so we have all types of outlets that we can raise hell and make somebody's hero. Don't sit back and just, justice will prevail. Justice will not prevail.
Let me add to that, if I may. The Philadelphia District Attorney's Office puts out a list, a do not call list. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
So that is out there where there's over 60 Philadelphia police officers on that list. And out of those 60, there's 30 that say do not call unless they have the assistant directors of the assistant district attorney's approval to call them to testify. And there's so many different reasons that they're on that list. They may be under indictment. They may be under investigation. They may have already lied on the stand. It just goes on and on. I have that copy. I have that list, and it's out there. It's available because it was attached to a court case.
I will appreciate it if you could forward it to us so we could put it on our Facebook so people could get it, if you don't mind. I just think it's important that these are simple things that a lot of people in the community don't know or don't know how to obtain it.
Right.
So we will provide it for you once we get it, people. Don't worry about that. You know me, I'll put it out there. But tell us a little bit about your podcast, where the people could tune in to get it, and what motivated you to start it.
So my podcast is called Is There Really Truth and Justice for All? And I wrote an article for PI Magazine called Is There Really Truth and Justice for All, talking about some of my cases and, to open up, like, listen, there's wrongful convictions and here they are. Here's a few of my cases. Here's a few examples. And I thought about that. Is there really truth and justice for all? And I like listening to different podcasts. And I said, I think that's a great name for a podcast. Let me start a podcast. So I did some research. I did some homework. So I chose to be on Voice America, which is a live show, a live feed at 11 o'clock on Wednesday, 11 o'clock Eastern Time, a.m. on Wednesdays. And it's available on every podcast platform there is. So if you listen to iTunes or Spotify, podcast or Podcoin, any of them, all of the platforms it's available, all you have to do is Google, Is There Really Truth and Justice for All? And it'll come up. And I just have a passion, and I like to talk about I like to have guests on my show who were wrongfully convicted or police officers who were corrupt or good as well and can talk about it. Clients, past clients, future clients. The list goes on. And I will have, there's one of my clients I will have on. I just want to talk about this for a second. So she was extradited from Arizona to Pennsylvania on a $1,500 check fraud case, which I never heard of such a thing. And she was a victim of this case. She wasn't involved in the case. She was selling some items. She posted it on an app. She received a check for $1,500. She cashed the check. They ended up, and you mentioned this earlier, in my opinion, they ended up bullying her and using the legal system to get her to come back to Pennsylvania to pay this $1,500, which should have been a civil matter because there was no intent, right? She didn't commit this crime. She didn't intentionally cash this check. She was selling an item. My investigation identified there was other people involved in this, one other person that they prosecuted as well in this particular county. And then, as I was doing my investigation, I found that there was numerous people throughout the United States that received a check from the same country club. It was written on a country club check. And there was one woman who was selling her wedding dress. There was another who was selling 4 tires off their car. There was a washer and dryer. And this is where our legal system sometimes can extort people and have them pay fines and pay for things that they were not responsible for. But imagine the district attorney's office, and I still can't understand this. When she was up for we tried to have a bail reduction hearing, and because they had a high bail. And this girl didn't have money. In fact, she had to send her 2 kids to go live with her ex-husband in another state because she was incarcerated. That trip from extraditing her, she spent 11 days in a van being driven with numerous criminals. She was the only female, and they drove her for 11 days. And then she spent 2.5 months in jail waiting trial. So at the bail reduction hearing, they didn't want to reduce her bail. And they said, look, she's already served more time on this. If she was found guilty, that's what she would have been sentenced to, about 3 months. She already spent that, right, between the transport time and the jail time. And they still were fighting it. And we won the bail reduction hearing at that time. And then she had to go and fight the case. And they did not want to just drop the charges and null it if she paid that $1,500. They wanted a criminal record on there. Now, where's the logic to that?
There is no logic.
Exactly, and that's part of the problem in this system. So is there really truth and justice for all? And it's not just people who are being charged with murder and homicide and drugs and rape. It's these smaller cases like that. This girl, her children had to relocate during a school year to go live in another state, and then only after that year be relocated back. Do you know how traumatic that is for a kid? Right? And now she can't even, she couldn't afford things. She couldn't get a job because on that job, there's a pending felony charge against her. So who wants to hire her? Right? And that's another thing that gets brought up is, our society, nobody wants to hire felons, and you're not allowed to hire felons, depending on certain things. But it becomes a cycle because what do you do? How do you earn a living? We need to as a, and I'm getting a little off track, but
I think that's perfectly clear because that goes into the heart of the conversation, the effect that wrongful conviction has on the family unit.
Yep. Not
just on the person serving the time.
Right. No, it's a domino effect, and we not only, we mentioned before that we as the United States incarcerate more people than any other country, domestic country. We also impose higher sentences than any other domestic country. So we put people behind bars for a longer time than any other country in the world. Why is that? Why? Where's the logic? And again, people should have to be held accountable for a crime that they commit. But move on. You got to move on, and you got to find something for them to do when they come out. Because if they can't get hired and they can't make, they're making minimum wage and they got a family with 3 kids, 4 kids, they can't survive on minimum wage. Nobody can. So there needs to be some things in this whole criminal justice reform that helps to rehabilitate offenders, which our country does a piss poor job on. We do a terrible job in the prisons. Right? There's some educational programs, and others can speak to this much better than I can. I know there's programs in there, and people can take advantage of certain programs. But overall, the general consensus is people learn to be better criminals in the prison system by going to prison than being rehabilitated.
Right. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a client that came out and that person needs therapy for the trauma of incarceration? Do some private investigator help their client even after they come out of prison? Getting them like jobs, settling, making sure they have a step. I know it's not your job to do that, but do some investigators do that?
Very few. I think very few, but I think there's a couple of my colleagues that definitely would and try to help. And I helped and still to this day am in touch with a juvenile lifer who was released, and I do everything I can to try to help that family and guide them and still talk to the parents on a regular basis months after he got released, and it's a difficult process. There's another one, Ryan Ferguson, who was a juvenile when a murder occurred, but he was charged when he was 19 years old, 2 years after, with the crime, and he spent 10 years in prison. There was a movie done. There were some things done on Ryan Ferguson, but I spoke at a wrongful conviction and civil rights symposium in Chicago where he was a guest speaker, and he talked about he still has PTSD, post-trauma stress disorder, because he was incarcerated, from the time he was 19 to 29 years old, and he was in the hole. they put him in segregation. He was 23 hours a day in the box, right, with 1 hour to go out and see some fresh air. For months, they did this to him, and the prison system. This is part of the problem. It trickles down, right? So they get involved with the prosecution, and they want to make things difficult for somebody. I had a guy who was pro se, and they went and they put him, and they wouldn't allow him to go to the law library. They ended up putting him in the hole, right? So he couldn't even communicate with me. He couldn't do anything. They are constantly out there trying to get the guy who's trying to fight for his rights. And again, that just circles back to why I started doing the podcast. Is there really truth and justice for all? Because I believe in the system or in fixing the system, and want to help these people who are wrongfully convicted, wrongfully charged, and beyond, and their families. It's a crisis that's in the United States that people need to embellish and understand. It does exist, and it doesn't matter. I mean, when I say it doesn't matter race, religion, sex, nationality. Anybody can be held accountable. This juvenile lifer that I'm talking about was a Caucasian middle-class family in York County when this crime occurred. So it's now in Philadelphia and most cities, it is going to discriminate against the minority. There is no doubt. I mean, there's studies. Look in the prisons. Look at how many minorities are in there versus Caucasians. I mean, there's profiling being done. But overall, it doesn't discriminate against race, religion, sex, nationality. Anybody can become a victim of the system and can be wrongfully accused and wrongfully charged of a crime.
So, in the time you've been a private investigator, have you ever had a DA, a district attorney, come to you and say, Jeff, we messed up on this one. Let's work something out. Have that ever happened? Or does it happen often, or does it happen at all?
I had a high-profile case, and there's still some things moving along with this, so I don't want to call it out, but it happened in Philadelphia. When I say high-profile, it was pretty high-profile. Involved some popular people, and the day we went through some proffers, my client was in jail for almost 2 years waiting trial. He didn't do it. I knew he didn't do it. Again, I'm sorry. I wish I can talk more about this, but to protect him and his safety now. But the day of the trial, when they were dropping all the charges, the DA said to me, Jeff, I know you interviewed and spoke to more people than we did. Can I get a copy of all your notes? And I'll tell you, that's sad, isn't it? And when I say that's sad because this was a high-profile murder in Philadelphia. They had the Philadelphia homicide unit working on this. They had the DA's detectives working on this. And now I'm a privately retained private investigator who the family had to pay money to utilize my services. They had unlimited funds to do their investigation. And the person who did that, who committed the crime, they never interviewed. There was multiple people involved in this altercation. There was one person they didn't talk to, and that was them. And that was this person. And I talked to all the people, and I identified the reason for this altercation and how it was it materialized and whatnot. And they just didn't go out and talk to the people. And I'm no better than them. They're no better than me, right? We do our jobs. Leave no rock unturned. You need to talk to everybody. And that's what I tell people, especially in the trial stage. Do not believe that the system is going to work for you. It's a 50-50 chance. And don't shortchange yourself during that trial stage, because that's when you need all the evidence and all the documentation that you can get. That's the most important time, because if you wait, that PCRA, that appeal, is an uphill battle that makes it even more difficult, and you don't have as many resources.
But what do we say to the people that go in there and they scared? They get smacked around by detectives because we know this happened, and they falsely confess. What do you tell them? Or what do you tell your client when you first meet them? If you meet them, because I'm pretty sure you meet them after their conviction. But what would you tell anyone that's getting arrested and they know they didn't commit the crime? What is the best advice a private investigator could give to them?
If they're being interviewed, interrogated by the police, do not talk to them, do not admit to anything, do not write anything. Get an attorney. Ask for an attorney. Ask for if they're a juvenile, ask for the parent to be present. Because what happens is they're going to twist your words, they're going to use your words against you, and they're going to manipulate your head, your brain. I mean, that's just the tactics that shouldn't be done.
But I'm scared. The detective's smacking me around.
Absolutely, and it happens. The detective starts smacking him around. They yell at him. They threaten him. They say, "You're going to prison for life. This is being taken away. You're never going to see your mommy again. Never going to see your daddy again. You better tell me. You better tell me you did it. Sign your name right here." And in those situations, the detectives type up the statement for him. They type it up. They say what they did, how they did it, when they did it, and they say, "Sign right here," and they smack him. Well, you know what? As scared as you may be, and as painful as those smacks, those punches may be, if that's what's happening, and that doesn't always happen, but it happened. Over the last 50 years in Philadelphia, it happened a lot. It happened a lot. Philadelphia and Chicago, and again, every major city. And you heard New York City. You heard about what they did that time. I'm blanking out on his name, where they took a plunger. I mean, the disgusting things that they can do to people. So fight your fight. Don't say anything unless you have an attorney present. Never.
And if you don't believe that wrongful convictions happen, go to Netflix and watch When They See Us. That's a perfect example how they treat juveniles in these police stations and how it could drastically change the lives, not only of the person being put in jail, but the community. Again, where can the people contact you? How should they contact you? What type of information you need to speed the process up if they want you to get involved or hire you in somebody's case?
So the best thing that can be done is make sure you have a private investigator as early in the case as possible. Attorneys go to law school to practice law. They don't go to law school to conduct investigations and learn how to conduct investigations. I am a board-certified criminal defense investigator. I attended the Criminal Defense Training Institute Academy. I specialize in criminal defense work, and that's another point. You may have a private investigator who does excellent surveillance work, and they're the top notch at getting cheating spouses or insurance fraud or workers' comp. That doesn't mean they're good at criminal defense work. There's arson investigators. There's all different kinds. So make sure you have somebody who knows who's been doing criminal defense work. But the sooner you can get them involved in your case, the better. You want to talk to witnesses when it's fresh in their mind. You want to be able to impeach the wrongful statements, whether it's deceitful witnesses, whether it's the police officers. You want to be able to impeach that and do everything you can. If it's in the appeal stage, a PCRA stage, again, you need to do the full Monty and get everything you can. That would be the best thing.
How they contact you? Can you give them your information in case somebody want to contact you with a question or maybe hire you? Which we hope they do.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I can be reached. Our office, our direct line is 610-696-7799. Again, 610-696-7799. Toll free. You can also reach us at 877-SEE-THAT. 877-SEE-SEEE, that, THAT. Our website is www.elpspda.com. That stands for Executive Legal and Professional Services, Private Detective Agency.com. And all of our contact information is on there as well. And the podcast can be found at Is There Really Truth and Justice for All?
I mean, you got it, people. You heard it here. This is the issues that it's affecting our city by the numbers. We got a few more minutes. I just want you to share with the public, and you don't have to mention no name, like how real this could be. Do you have any particular cases out there, no names, that you could share with the public that's going through the stages of proving their innocence, but because certain information or maybe because they gave a false confession, they blocking it. The DA is blocking it from going to the next level, which is, letting their PCRA go through. I think it's important because like you said, a lot of people out there are pro se. A lot of their loved ones are pro se. What can that person do if you gave a false confession to take it back and I could prove that I ain't do it? I was scared. What should they produce in their PCRA as a pro se?
Anything and everything, as much information as possible. And then the challenge is that information, that redacted statement from themselves, from witnesses, needs to be corroborated by somebody. So just so somebody redacts their statement doesn't mean it's a get out of jail free card. It's a big challenge. I will say, I do want to say there's one complaint I have about a particular case in Philadelphia and the current district attorney's office. So I have a client who was charged with attempted homicide.
Feel free to put his name if you want.
I have there is a client who was charged with attempted homicide, and the victim testified at the time of his trial. And this was about 13 years ago. He testified at the time of the trial. He was shot 3 times in his stomach. He was in the hospital. The day of the trial, when he was scheduled to testify, he walked out of the courtroom because he was not sure. He didn't think that that person was the shooter who was on trial. The DA's office sent the cops after him and said, if you don't get back here and testify, we're going to lock you up. They intimidated him. He went back in there and he testified and said he did it. He was coerced to say that that person did it. Several years later, I tracked him down. He provided a signed affidavit to me saying that that was not the shooter and that he didn't do it. We went as far as to have a PCRA a pre-hearing, right, to see if there's going to be, if you can get a PCRA hearing. So I had to subpoena him. He refused to come to court because he was afraid that he was going to be arrested, understood, for perjury. I took a video statement from him, an 8-minute video statement holding the most recent newspaper for that day to prove that it wasn't doctored or anything. He looked at the camera, addressed it to the judge, and said, Your Honor, he was not the shooter. He did not do it. I was coerced to make this statement. They threatened me. They told me that they were going to put me in jail if I didn't say he did it. And I am willing to tell you that he didn't do it. In fact, I saw the true shooter on the streets a year and a half ago. And then I served him. I gave him the paper. He took it out of his car and threw it on the ground and said, Jeff, I can't come in. You know, I don't want to go to jail. I got a family now. I'm working. I got a clean life ahead of me. And Philadelphia, I've never heard of this, but they said that that was bad service. He put it out of his car. He touched it, right? He knew. I just videotaped him. And we asked for them to give him, we asked for Krasner's office to give him immunity to come testify, to say that they would not lock him up because they tried to coerce him, and they refused to give him immunity. Now, again, here's a person who was the victim. He was the victim. He's got nothing to gain by this. He's got nothing to gain, and they refused to take that. So that troubles me to this day. That still troubles me, and you know we'd like to be able to follow up. He even followed up with me. He feels bad. But that is the uphill battle, and that's why there is no truth and justice for everyone.
Well, I'm glad you share that case with us, because I always say that for every good thing that somebody do, there's always some bad stuff behind that nobody talk about. You know, even though the balance, some of the good stuff that he's doing, you know, exonerating people at that rate is good. Right? But if we have one innocent person in prison, then there is no justice. And you heard it here first, you know, on Usala Radio. We want to thank you for coming in. Know that this is your house. Anytime you want to come in and put anyone's case out there, promote somebody's case that might be innocent, our doors is open. I want to thank everybody on Facebook, everybody that tapped in. You know, share this tape, share it. The podcast will come out Tuesday on Usala Radio, but you heard it here first, live. And if you heard it on a Justice Conversation, then you know it's official. Next week, and our show will be Larry Tereski, a neuroscientist that's going to be speaking about the brain and how it applies to those 18 to 24 and how the science could potentially release them, the same science that released juvenile lifers. So I thank everybody out there. Thank you. Our show is produced by Dylan and is sponsored by Westchester University.